Why do you feel that sudden, frantic pressure to fill the silence the second you think someone is judging your choices? Why is it that being 5 minutes late to a meeting makes you immediately explain the traffic, the constructions on the way, and all the small things that went wrong in your morning before you've even opened your laptop, even though no one else had even mentioned the time? Why does cancelling a dinner date or missing an appointment feel like a social crime, one that requires a 3-paragraph text message of professional and personal excuses just to make your absence legal in the eyes of others? Have you ever caught yourself over-explaining a sick day, listing your symptoms like a witness under cross-examination, just to prove you aren't slacking, despite having the time earned and a fever to match? Why do we feel this desperate need to provide a closing argument for every minute we aren't productive or available, as if our basic human needs are constantly under trial? We are going to analyze these questions step by step, peeling back the layers of what we call politeness to find the psychological signal hidden underneath. What you are about to discover is that this isn't a communication habit, it is a permission problem. Clarity on why you do this and how to stop will only emerge by the end of this video, but once it does, you may never feel the need to justify your existence to anyone ever again. The root of the permission problem is the belief that our internal reality is insufficient evidence. We operate under the assumption that our feelings are subjective and therefore unreliable, while the opinions of others are objective and final. This creates a power imbalance where we are always the petitioner and the world is always the magistrate. We spend our lives waiting for a stamp of approval that never stays permanent, leading to a cycle of perpetual anxiety. This strategy, essential in childhood for security, becomes an energetic tax we pay as adults, fundamentally training our brains to believe that our raw, unadorned truth is defective. By constantly seeking this external visa for our emotions, we inadvertently tell our nervous system that our own perception of reality is a second-class citizen in the world of facts. When we talk about permission to exist, we are talking about the fundamental right to occupy space and time without offering a return on investment. The over-explainer believes their seat at the table is conditional. They think, if I am not useful or pleasant or perfectly punctual, I must explain why so they don't take my seat away. Breaking this habit requires the radical realization that the seat is yours by birthright, not by performance. This constant labor of justification is an exhausting exercise, whereas true, organic confidence grows only when we allow our presence alone to be enough, unburdened by the need to engineer a why for every movement. When you stop performing for your seat, you finally notice that the floor beneath you is solid and has been supporting you all along without any effort on your part. Most people don't realize it, but there is a silent, almost invisible behavior that dominates a large part of modern human relationships: the compulsion to explain oneself all the time. It is a habit that seems harmless, even polite. After all, justifying your choices, your emotions, your absences, or mood changes can sound like empathy, like consideration for others. But behind this constant need to justify oneself lies something much deeper and more disturbing: a poorly healed psychological wound. Carl Jung, one of the greatest names in analytical psychology, identified this pattern as a clear symptom of disconnection from the self. This behavior operates as a chronic leak in our personal boundaries, often activated because we are more comfortable managing someone else's discomfort than sitting in the silence of our own conviction. This leak acts like a puncture in a pressurized vessel, causing our internal psychological strength to hiss away until we are left feeling deflated and dependent on others to pump us back up. For Jung, the self is the center of the psyche, the source of innate wisdom and authority. When we compulsively explain, we are effectively outsourcing that center to the people around us. We are moving our gravity from our own chest to the eyes of the person standing in front of us. Every time we seek a nod of understanding before we feel settled in our decision, we are telling our subconscious that our own conviction isn't strong enough to stand on its own. This constant external tilt creates a state of perpetual vertigo where we only feel stable when we are being perceived. To regain balance, we must practice the radical act of letting our yes mean yes and our no mean no without auditing them in someone else's face. This outsourced gravity means we can only feel upright if someone else is looking at us, turning our entire existence into a desperate search for a mirror. This self-neglect manifests as a split persona. There is the person who feels the need, the true self, and the person who translates that need into something palatable for others, the mask. Over time, the mask becomes so heavy and so busy explaining itself that the true self begins to wither from a lack of attention. The person who constantly explains themselves is often seeking something they never received, a fundamental, non-negotiable permission to simply be. This constant translation chokes intimacy and connection. We feel deeply lonely because we know the other person is only accepting the case we have carefully presented, not the messy, authentic person behind it. The tragedy of the mask is that even when it is loved, the person behind it feels invisible because they know it is the performance, not the performer, that is being embraced. This behavior often arises in environments marked by emotional invalidation, contexts often familial where a child's subjective experience is systematically disqualified. You've likely heard the phrases, "That's nonsense," "You're exaggerating," or "There's no reason to feel that way." The internalized message is brutal. What I feel only has value if others understand, approve, or allow it. In these environments, the child's nervous system learns it is a liar, which develops into a desperate adult need to gaslight themselves before others can. This systemic disqualification forces the child to become an observer of their own life from the outside, constantly checking the weather report of a parent's face to see if their own internal storm is allowed to exist. In these environments, a child learns that truth is a consensus, not a feeling. If they are cold, but their parent says, "It's not cold in here," the child learns to distrust their own skin. To survive, the child develops a legalistic way of communicating. They learn to gather evidence and build cases for their emotions. "I'm not just sad. Look, I'm crying and Jimmy hit me and I missed lunch." They become miniature lawyers, hoping that if they present a logical enough argument, they will finally be granted the right to their own experience. This exhausted, legalistic persona believes it is safe only when it can sync its reality with another's, never realizing that true freedom is the authority to declare your reality without needing a witness to sign it into law. This attorney at heart spends adulthood gathering exhibits for their innocence, oblivious to the fact that there is no judge in the room except the one they brought with them. As adults, this manifests as a desperate attempt to avoid abandonment. We believe that if we leave a gap of unexplained behavior, someone will fill it with a negative judgment that leads to our exclusion. We fear that if we don't explain why we bought a new car, or why we ended a relationship, or why we changed our mind, people will see us as erratic or bad. We use explanation as a glue to keep people stuck to us, fearing that without total transparency, the connection will dissolve. This strategy backfires because connection requires the spaciousness of mystery and autonomy. By over-explaining, we attempt to control people with a forced map of our minds, which only suffocates genuine relationships. We mistakenly believe that being fully known means being fully documented, but real intimacy is being seen in the gaps where no explanation exists. But this constant effort comes at a very high price: the loss of your own psychological autonomy. By focusing on external validation, you begin to neglect your internal authority. You no longer act because you believe in something. You act because you need to justify yourself to avoid being misunderstood. You no longer feel free. Instead, you rationalize your emotions to avoid the discomfort of being viewed negatively. When this happens, we no longer author our lives. We only edit the text to please a critical audience, mistaking safety for freedom and finding ourselves with a hollow confidence that collapses when no one asks why. This hollow confidence is like a beautiful stage set with no foundation. It looks impressive to the passerby but offers no real shelter when the wind starts to blow. When you live for the verdict of others, your life becomes a series of reactions rather than a series of actions. You become a master of the preemptive strike, modifying your behavior before you even do it to ensure the explanation will be easy later. This leads to a stifled existence where creativity and spontaneity go to die. You can't take a risk if you can't explain the logic of it to your neighbor, and you can't follow a hunch if it doesn't look good on a spreadsheet of social norms. This preemptive narration disconnects us from our intuition, ensuring we only ever make reasonable choices, never wild, brilliant, or truly our own ones. We become the accountants of our own potential, vetoing any inspiration that cannot be immediately justified by a cost-benefit analysis of social approval. Gradually, you stop living for yourself and start acting for others, in an eternal theatre where the audience has more power than the protagonist. Jung understood this as a central obstacle to becoming who you truly are: individuation. As long as you need to explain yourself to feel legitimate, you are not free. Compulsive explanation is a sophisticated form of submission. With each justification, you are quietly saying, "I can only exist if you allow it." The theatre only closes, and the real self only emerges when the protagonist has the courage to ignore the balcony and perform for an audience of one. True individuation requires the grit to walk off the stage entirely and realize that the sun shines just as brightly in the alleyway as it does under the spotlight. Compulsive self-explanation is not just a defense mechanism, it is a continuous act of self-betrayal. This internal betrayal does not happen explosively. It is gradual, subtle, and happens every day. It occurs when you laugh at something you don't find funny to seem sociable, or when you say yes while meaning no to avoid being seen as selfish. Every such concession is a quiet signal to your psyche that you are dangerous or wrong, creating a low hum of perpetual guilt. This quiet accumulation of micro-betrayals creates a massive debt of integrity that eventually causes the entire structure of our self-trust to buckle. Think of the energy required to maintain this facade. It is an exhausting 24/7 surveillance of your own impulses. Every time you swallow a no and replace it with a yes because, you are telling your inner self that its boundaries are negotiable. You are essentially saying to your soul, your needs are secondary to their comfort. This creates a deep internal resentment that eventually poisons the very relationships you are trying so hard to save through your politeness. The surveillance itself causes a unique kind of burnout, draining all mental bandwidth that could be used for building actual competence and self-assurance. This internal watchdog is so busy barking at your own shadows that it leaves you too tired to notice when the actual doors of opportunity are swinging open. It's when you explain your sadness as tiredness because you don't want to be a burden, or when you feel anger but disguise it as rationality because you fear seeming immature. With each small concession made in the name of acceptance, a part of the soul is left behind. Jung identified that this behavior reflects an ego that has become a servant of external acceptance. You stop listening to your own intuition and start questioning your most authentic motivations until doubt takes the place of inner confidence. This creates a fragmented identity where you hide your true self so deeply behind footnotes that you forget how to feel your own, with faith, confidence. By relabeling your heart's raw data to suit the market, you eventually lose the ability to read your own internal compass altogether. This process of self-abandonment is insidious because it is socially valued. People who adjust well, who avoid conflicts, and who are easy are often praised. But behind this false harmony lies a deep emotional exhaustion, the exhaustion of those who live for others but can no longer hear themselves. This praise is a subtle trap, rewarding you for your self-disappearance and reinforcing the bars of a polite prison. The world claps for the easy person because they are convenient, never realizing they are clapping for the slow suicide of a human spirit. The nice person who always explains themselves is often the most tired person in the room. Their harmony is built on the graveyard of their own suppressed desires. They are praised for being reasonable and understanding, but these are often just synonyms for compliant. This social reward system reinforces the prison bars, making the individual feel that if they ever stopped explaining, they would lose their identity as a good person. To build real confidence, one must risk being difficult, which is usually just a social term for a person who knows their value and won't lower it. The nice person is like a bank that gives away all its capital for free, wondering why it feels bankrupt even while its customers are cheering. Jung connected this fragmentation to chronic anxiety and feelings of emptiness because the soul is screaming to be heard but has been silenced for the sake of social adaptation. The anxiety isn't about the traffic or the dinner date. It's the anxiety of a self that has been abandoned by its own owner. The only way to break this cycle is to reclaim internal authority. This means developing the capacity to uphold your truth even when it is not understood, even when it causes discomfort, or even when it challenges expectations. This is the beginning of true wholeness, even if it means disappointing others. True wholeness is the moment you realize that disappointing the world is a small price to pay for finally being on speaking terms with yourself. Reclaiming this authority involves a very uncomfortable silence. It is the moment when you stop asking, "Will they understand?" and start asserting, "This is true for me." Internal authority is the opposite of compulsive self-explanation. It arises from the deep conviction that your truth does not need to be negotiated. This transition is terrifying because it feels like social suicide. When you stop providing the why, you leave a void. Other people may rush into that void with their own assumptions. He's being rude, or she's being difficult, to reclaim your authority, you must be willing to let them think those things. You must be willing to be the villain in someone else's story so that you can finally be the hero on your own. It is the ultimate liberation to realize that you cannot control the story told about you anyway, so you might as well tell your own. When you accept your role as the villain in a toxic narrative, you suddenly find that the chains of that narrative have no power to bind you. Jung said that this path requires traversing a desert of inner solitude. It is the moment when, for the first time, you hold a no without guilt or end a conversation without explaining why. Not out of arrogance, but because you owe nothing to anyone to exist. You offer your truth as a gift, not as a plea for acceptance. In this desert, you discover that the people who truly belong in your life don't actually need the 3-paragraph explanation. They were waiting for the real you to show up all along. In this solitude, you discover your own self-respect is a perennial spring, finally changing the quality of your relationships from those who need to control you to those who respect your strength. This desert is not a place of lack, but a place of stripping away everything that was never truly yours until only the indestructible remains. Silence, when it arises from integrity, is a transformative force. It is not an absence of response, but a presence of authority. When you stop justifying yourself, you deactivate an entire system of psychological control that feeds on your insecurity. Consider the power shift that occurs when you simply say, "I can't make it," and stop there. By not offering an excuse, you are not giving the other person anything to evaluate. You have closed the courtroom. There is no evidence to weigh, no validity to check. You are signaling that your decision is a fact of nature, like the weather, rather than a proposal up for debate. This forces the other person to either respect your boundary or reveal their own need for control. This silence filters your life, revealing who respects your mystery and who simply valued your reactivity, transforming your entire social dynamic. A boundary without an explanation is a mirror that forces others to look at their own entitlement rather than your supposed flaws. There is something magnetic about a person who feels no need to explain themselves. This is psychological integrity, the state of someone who no longer negotiates their essence to fit expectations. An integrated person does not beg, they communicate. They do not start from the premise that they need to justify their existence. This solidity is alluring because it suggests a person who is comfortable in their own skin. We are naturally drawn to those who are grounded, precisely because they have stopped floating on the whims of other people's opinions. Think of someone you respect deeply. Chances are they don't over-explain. They speak with a certain economy of words because they trust that their presence and their actions speak for themselves. This weight they carry comes from the fact that they aren't leaking energy through 1,000 tiny justifications. They are a solid object in a world of ghosts. When they say yes, it means something because they have the no to back it up. Their words come from a solid center, and the world treats those who treat themselves with respect with far more weight. Integrity is the art of being whole, of not fragmenting to please. The less you seek approval, the more respect you evoke. A centered person does not beg for space, they occupy it. They do not react out of insecurity, they act out of alignment. Respect is not a currency you earn by being useful. It is a natural law that applies to anyone who refuses to be broken into pieces for the sake of convenience. So let us return to those questions we began with. Why do we launch into plays about traffic or medical reports about our fevers? We do it because we are still that child hoping the world will give us a hall pass to be human. But you are the one who holds the pen. Every time you catch yourself starting a sentence with, "I'm so sorry, it's just that," and you choose to stop, you are performing a small act of self-retrieval. You are stitching a piece of your soul back into place. You are moving from a pleading frequency to a being frequency. This isn't about being cold or unkind, it's about being honest. The most honest thing you can do is to let your yes be yes and your no be no, without the decorative lace of 1,000 excuses. This radical honesty is the only soil in which a genuine adult relationship can actually take root and thrive. When you stop explaining yourself, you are no longer saying, "Please understand me." You are emanating a new frequency. I know who I am, and I don't need your permission. Silence changes the configuration of your life because it communicates what you once begged for. Every time you silence an explanation, you take your place in the world as someone who already knows they belong. The next time the urge to justify rises, pause and see what happens if you don't. You will find that real freedom isn't making everyone agree with you. It's realizing you no longer need them to. This silence is the language of your dignity. It is the moment you reclaim your sovereign power. The moment you are silent, the world listens. The question is, are you ready to be the person that silence commands? When you finally stop explaining your worth, you give others the chance to actually witness it for the first time. To step into this truth is to step into a new identity, one that requires no footnoting and grants you an unshakable confidence, a confidence built not on the shifting sands of public consensus, but on the solid bedrock of your own being. Your existence is a statement, not a question. It is time you stopped asking the world for the answer.